A very warm good morning to all our zealous faculties who have gathered here. Let us begin by invoking her divine blessings through prayer. ध्यायामो धवलावगुण्ठनवतीं तेजोमयीं नैष्टिकीम् स्निग्धात्माङ्गविलोकिनीं भगवतीं मन्दस्मितश्रीमुखीं वात्सल्यामृतवर्षिणीं सुमधुरं सङ्कीर्तनालापिनीं श्यामाङ्गीं मधुसिक्तसूक्तिम् अमृतानन्दात्मिकामीश्वरीम् ॐ अमृतेश्वरी नमः ॐ अमृतेश्वरी नमः ॐ अमृतेश्वरी नमः. Once again, on behalf of the Department of Cultural Education, Amrita Darshanam, International Center for Spiritual Studies, I welcome you all to the Faculty Development Program. Everyone in this gathering has immense passion and deep affection towards Indian culture and history in their own way. And for such a fervent group, a development program on Mahabharata popped colorful fireworks in us. Yes, we all know Mahabharata in a nutshell, and in today's session, we would be having a wider understanding about Mahabharata with Professor Madhu. Knowing our speaker is very much prerequisite because it helps the listener in valuing the knowledge they receive from the speaker. So without much delay, I request Brahmachari Achyutamrita Chaitanya, Head Department of Cultural Education, Amritarshanam, Amritapuri Campus, to introduce our today's speaker, Professor Madhu. Over to you, Achutji.
Shivaya. Welcome all. A very good morning. Let me bow down to my beloved mother, my master, Amma. I am really happy to introduce my friend and brother, Professor Madhu, to this august audience. Many of you have already attended to one of his webinars, I think, as well as one MDP program, Faculty Development Program, which was on Ramayana, and the webinar was on Mahabharata, which was attended by most of the Mahabharata Upanayanam students. Anyway, I am really privileged to introduce him once again to this very serious and very inquisitive and very eager students of Mahabharata. We all faculties are there as well as Mahabharata Upanayanam students are there. But all of us are students in front of Mahabharata. And here we have Professor Madhu to introduce a topic which is very relevant. That is realism and ideation in Mahabharata to all of us. It's a very relevant topic, as all of us know. Now there are many discussions regarding the nature of Mahabharata as well as Ramayana, whether it was a poem, just poetry, where it is just poetry, or is it history, and many things are there. And in the first talk, Madhu discussed or explained Ramayana in this light. Today, he will be discussing Mahabharata, but in a different way, so that it won't be any repetition. And I would like to introduce him. Our friendship is some 2 decades old. In the early years of 2000, we met together in Ernakulam. He was functioning at Kalu in those days. And from that day onwards, on almost all week, we used to meet in the Satsang were held in Ernakulam. Madhu is at present, as all of you know, professor in the English department at St. Peter's College, Kolenchery, Ernakulam district. This college is affiliated to Mahabharata University. And before that, he was working in Sacred Heart High Secondary School and also in Ernakulam town. His interests are very diverse. He is a very keen student, serious student of Indian culture, philosophy, spirituality, religion, and arts also. He has delivered many lectures, or he has addressed the youth members in different or from different platforms, especially from Bangalore. He was working with Swami Amadagita in many meetings there, many gatherings there. Madhu had attended and addressed the audience on topics related to our culture and philosophy and spirituality. Then, as a part of cultural exchange program, Madhu has visited Mata Amrandamai Matam Amrutapuri as a part of giving lectures to university students from Columbia University, which was a program of cultural exchange with Amrita University, Amrutapuri campus, and Columbia University, which was organized by Amrita Darshan. So, before the Corona lockdown started, we used to have cultural exchange programs with Columbia University students, and Madhu came here and addressed them and educated them or enlightened them on Amma's activities, Amma's life, Amma's philosophy, everything. Then he was, prior to that, Madhu used to address students from Notre Dame University as a part of cultural exchange program between Notre Dame University and Sacred Heart College in Ernakulam. And one interesting thing all of you have to know about Madhu is he's a musician, he's a musicologist and a violinist. We used to discuss about music with him. He was actually Kaladilagam during his school days, I believe. My memory is that in Carnatic music, and he's a violinist also. So I think this introduction is, and above all, he's an ardent devotee of Amma. He visits ashram Amrutapuri campus regularly, and one or 2 months before also, even during this lockdown period, he came here and met. And with these brief words, I conclude this formal introduction. Actually, this is not enough because we are very intimate friends, brothers. So, as a part of this DP, I officially introduced him, and he's more than these words. And I heartily welcome also to this gathering to address our audience.
Om Amarteshwari Namaha. Om Namah Shivaya. My pranams at the lotus feet of Amma, and my pranams also to Achitamrita Swamiji. He has been more than a friend to me. He has been my mentor also. As he said, our relationship extends over so many years, more than 2 decades. And he has acted as my mentor also. I have had the occasion to learn so many things from him. He has deeply influenced my understanding of various concepts, various subjects, especially regarding Indian philosophy, spirituality, etc. So I'm happy that I'm able to present this session when he is also present. And my salutations to all of you. So this session is actually intended as part of an academic exercise. Personally, I would suggest that this session must be seen as part of an academic exercise, because that is how we approach the Indian classical text today. That is the only common platform for us to approach Indian classical text today. When I say this, I know that actually classical texts or classic texts like Mahabharata, Ramayana, etc., they have their own approaches, their own genre-specific approaches. There are conventional, traditional, canonical approaches to studies of these texts. And I'm aware also that there are so many centers, so many places in India, so many nooks and corners in India where the traditional approaches are being done. The Ramayana or the Mahabharata or the Vedas or the scriptures, the other scriptures like the Upanishads and such things, such traditional practices or spiritual practices are taught and learned the conventional way itself. I'm aware of that. And it takes about 10 to 12 years to complete a course in that fashion. There are so many people, so many scholars, so many practitioners, and so many experts in these texts and practices who come out from these centers also. But that is a very small minority. Even though the numbers might be large, the percentage is very, very less. So as far as we are concerned, as far as we students and teachers who work in the field of education are concerned, usually we have had to discuss these texts from an academic perspective. And we cannot rule out that necessity also, because that is the only process, only platform available for us. In fact, there has been a standardization of educational processes all over the world. And today, we will never be, from today's position, we will never be able to go back to the past days where things were learned in their own specific idiom. So there is no point in our believing that this is not the way to approach classical texts. This is not the way to approach Mahabharata or Vedas. The English education, the westernized norms have already become the rule of the order of the day. And so our endeavor will be to stand within that perspective or stand within that framework and yet approach our text in a different way, so that the format will be Western or modern or contemporary or academic or university. You can label it in any way you want. The format will be what it is today, but at the same time, the content and the approach will be traditional, conventional, so that we will be able to go to the essence of whatever we take up for discussion and study. So that is why my introduction to this session actually, and so that is why I have titled it as text and text. I inserted those two words later because I wanted to give an impression that today the meaning of text and textuality are very, very different from how it used to be a couple of years ago. Today, anything is a text. It is not just printed material. It is not just words. Anything can be treated as a text, whether it is a work of literature, whether it is a work of architecture or sculpture or painting or music or dress code or anything, even food habits. All these are considered as texts. So the textuality of the text is not as we have understood it in the previous years, namely as words or scripted texts. It is much more than that. But the key words in this title are realism and ideation. The core title is Realism and Ideation in the Mahabharata. I inserted text and textuality just to highlight the notion that text today means much more than the scripted text. So I thought I'll begin with the title itself. So as I said earlier, this is actually we are planting ourselves or we are basing ourselves on the Western format or the global format, the academic format, the university format. At the same time, our approach will be in a totally different way. So let us begin with the term realism itself. Now, these words, namely realism, etc., idealism, etc., these words are actually part of our common parlance. We use these words in our everyday life, but we use them as words. We do not know them as terms. Beyond being words, very many of these words, a number of words that we use in our daily language are actually terms, and they have their contextual meanings as well. We are unaware of them, and so we use it very leisurely. So I thought I'll take up these terms so that we will understand what exactly we are now doing with these texts and what we are supposed to do actually beyond what we are doing now. Realism is a term. Realism, this term I have used in the European context. In the European context, we can say that realism is the representation of reality. It is the representation of reality. But then there is a problem. What exactly is reality? What does real mean? This is a fundamental problem which has occupied Western philosophy over a couple of centuries, or maybe more than 2000 years. Here, we will have to understand that real is a technical term which does not have its own meaning, but which has only a relative meaning. We can understand real in the European context only by comparing it to another word, another term, namely ideal. So, real actually means that which is not ideal. So, the word ideal is also another term. It is also a technical term. Ideal comes from the word idea. So, the real is understood in terms of idea. The real versus ideal is an equation. It is an epistemic equation. Sorry, it is a binaristic equation where real is actually intended as the opposition the binary opposition to ideal. We understand it necessary or concrete. All these things can be coupled into our understanding of real. It can be real can mean physical or material or something which is objective, which we call empirical, something that can be accessed by the senses, that is sensory, something which is concrete, etc. These are the different shades of meaning that we can assign to the term real. Now, ideal. Ideal means something which is extrasensory, something which is abstract, something which is imagined or imaginary, something which is only conceptual, hypothetical, etc. These are various terms that various shades of meaning that we can associate with the word ideal. This dichotomy happened in the Platonic or the Socratic concept. Before, that is during the BC, in the context of the Socratic philosophy, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, etc. These were the founding fathers of what we discuss today as Western philosophy. And Plato's view was that the world that we inhabit, the world in which we live, and the world with which we interact in our day-to-day lives, the phenomenal world of which we are part, is not actually the real world. There is another world, the world of ideas, the ideal world. The phenomenal world in which we live, with which we are familiar, is only a pale and inferior reflection. It is an inferior reflection of the ideal world. So, according to Plato and according to Greek philosophy, the pre-Christian Greek philosophy, according to that philosophy, the real world was actually the ideal world, the world of ideas. We have not seen it. We have not. And the world in which we live is only a very removed, pale, inferior, imperfect representation or reflection of that ideal world. So the notion of real has changed from age to age in the Western context. So Plato would say that this world is an imaginary world. It is actually an unreal world, whereas there is another world, the ideal world. So this is the shift of meaning that has come to the word real. Now, this equation, that is real versus ideal, became all the more important or significant and pertinent during the Enlightenment age. The meanings that we discussed just now were in the context of the pre-Enlightenment age. But since the Enlightenment period in European history, the meaning changed, and that is how we discussed real as physical, material, objective, etc. In the Enlightenment period, the post-Enlightenment period, therefore, we can say that unreal came to be real. The unreal world, that is, the phenomenal world, according to Plato, is today acknowledged as the real world. And realism is nothing but the representation of this reality. It is a Western European approach or methodology or act. So representing the physical environment, the concrete environment, the material environment, the phenomenal world in a faithful manner. That is, faithfulness means representing it in its shape and form and physical nature is called realism. That is how we understand realism. I hope the idea of realism is clear. So to summarize this point, namely realism, let us understand it like this. In the Platonic context or the Socratic context or the context of Greek philosophy, the world that we are familiar with, the world of our immediate experience, was treated as unreal. And there was another world, the world of ideas, the ideal world, of which this unreal world is a pale imitation or reflection. It is imitation. The word Plato has used is imitation. Mimesis, the Greek word that he has used is mimesis, which in English we can understand as imitation. Whereas in the post-Enlightenment period, this unreal world, according to Plato, became the real world to us. And from then on, this equation of real versus ideal became prominent, whereby we revise the definition of real and we treat today's phenomenal world as real and any other world or any other concept as ideal. That is why we talk about an ideal way of life, an ideal world, an ideal society, which simply means a utopian society in the Western context, because the ideal is not real. So the real versus ideal problematic, philosophical problematic. the binaristic equation, the oppositional equation, the mutually oppositional equation. It is in this context that we can understand the word, the term real. And realism is nothing but the representation of this real. That is the avoidance of the ideal. Now we come to the next word in this title, ideation. This word, I have used it in the Indian context. I have deliberately done so. This has been used in the Indian context, in which the word idea is going to be used as just our ordinary word. I am not referring to the idea of the Socratic world or the Platonic world or the world of the Greek philosophers. It is just an ordinary English word which we used it in our ordinary day-to-day language as part of our Indian life. So here, ideation, I have used the word ideation in the sense of developing something into an idea. Developing something into an idea. The process of developing something into an idea is called ideation. It is in this sense that I have used this word in this title. So, develop something into an idea means to form and shape something into a graspable, visualizable, understandable experience. That is what we mean by ideation here. To develop something, to form something and shape something into a graspable or visualizable, imaginable, understandable experience. Now, what is that something which can be shaped and formed into an idea? Truth. It is in this context that I'm using the word ideation. So, what is that? What is it that can be formed and shaped into a graspable, visualizable, understandable experience? Truth. That something is truth. Now, what is truth? This is a very, very complicated matter, a very sophisticated point of discussion, both in Western philosophy and in Eastern philosophy. But let us approach it like this. Let us try to understand it bit by bit. Anyway, truth is not an immediate experience for the commoner. That is the reality as far as we are concerned. Truth is not an immediate experience for the commoner, even though and even while he is actually interacting in it, interacting with it, living in it, living by it, and in it always. We are in truth. We exist by truth. We interact with truth. Always we are in it. Yet we do not immediately experience it. We do not consciously experience it. We are not aware of the truthfulness of the truth. Why? Because truth is abstract. It is abstract. It is attributeless. We have been conditioned by realism. That is where this term realism becomes important. For a couple of centuries, especially after the Enlightenment happened in the European history, our educational systems have been conditioned, organized, and defined and practiced by what you call realism. Our imagination today is realistic. Our expectations from education and from studies are realistic. So, because realism has come to rule our understanding processes, our thinking processes, our apperceptive processes, we have somehow lost our direct interaction or direct experience with what we call truth. So that is why truth is not an immediate experience for the commoner, even though and even while he's interacting with truth every moment. So for us, therefore, truth is abstract and attributeless, and something which is abstract and attributeless cannot be reality. We refuse to acknowledge something which is abstract, something which has no attributes, something which has no shape and form, something which has no definitions as unreal. That is our problem today. That is a great epistemic problem which has overcome the approaches to studying various branches of knowledge. So truth is abstract and attributeless, yet we can say that all of us have had stray encounters with this truth. All of us have had stray encounters, unexpected encounters with this truth. One form is in the form of intuition. One instance is in the form of intuition. Now and then we have had intuitions. But the problem is, even when we have had intuitions, the intuitions are only partial experiences of truth. It is not a whole. We have partial experiences, unexplained, unexplainable experiences with truth, but they are partial, they are not whole. And moreover, even as partial experiences, it usually goes unrecognized. Even though we get intuitions once in a while, we fail to recognize them. We fail to recognize its impact and its significance. It just passes like that. Why? Because experience to us is of two types. It is bifold. It is intellectual and it is emotional. Anything beyond that, we dismiss it as abstract or imaginings or unreal. So when we talk about experience also, we have a formula for us. We have imbibed the formula, maybe unconsciously, as a part of our westernized, Eurocentric academic university education. Experience to us is intellectual and emotional. These two kinds of emotional alone are possible for the commoner. Anything else, any other extra intellectual or extra emotional experience, we regard it with skepticism. We dismiss it as imaginings of the mind. Now, the problem with these two kinds of experiences, it is not a problem actually, the issue of these two kinds of experiences. The intellectual experience is what has been codified in the form of Vedas, Upanishads, etc. Something which in Western language we would call scripture. Of course, strictly speaking, the word scripture is not to be applied to Vedas and Upanishads and such texts, because scripture means an entirely different thing in the Western context. But for want of another English word, we are forced to use these words, these terms as just ordinary words. Scripture been codified in the form of Vedas and Upanishads. However, it is not possible for all of us to approach the Vedas in that way, because the function of intellect is very, very limited. It can only lead you. Intellect can only be a vehicle, and as a vehicle or as a tool, the intellect can only lead you to the portals of truth. It can lead you to the gateway of truth, but then you have to get down from it. And the culmination of this journey through intellect is in the direct experience of truth itself. And then that experience is necessarily an intuitive experience, and it becomes an intuitive experience of the whole. So the function of intellectual experience is very limited. It can only take you to the gateway of truth or the gateway of a holistic experience. And that experience itself is intuitive, which means you will have to abandon intellect at some point of your journey. Only after which we will be able to enter into the direct perception of truth as a whole. Now, another problem with intellect is that intellect is not universally valid, because it will not suit one and all. It will not suit every single individual in the world, because the degree of intellect and the kind of intellect is not the same in all persons. The text is the same, but the text is approached by millions and millions of individuals, and the degree of intellect and the kind of intellect in these millions of individuals is not at all the same. So most people do not possess the degree and kind of intellect which is required to intellectualize this abstract truth, which has been codified or recorded in the form of Vedas or Upanishads or any other texts. So the intellectual approach will not be enough. And we will have to admit the fact that the majority of human beings are not intellectual beings. Even though today we know that majority of human beings are educated beings, we have studied in schools and colleges and universities and obtained degrees, and degrees are actually certificates of our intellect. So we regard ourselves as intellectuals, yet we will have to admit the fact that from this angle, that is, from the angle of approaching classical texts, we will have to admit the fact that most people, most human beings are emotional beings rather than intellectual beings. The kind of intellect required to decode and decipher the experience which has been uh, recorded in the Vedas or such classical texts, that is not possible. It is not easy to get at that experience intellectually. We do not possess that required kind of intellectual equipment, because we are largely emotional beings. Therefore, the emotional approach to truth, the emotional approach to the intuitive experience, the ultimate intuitive experience, best suits the majority of people. Of course, there are not just intellectual beings and emotional beings, there are the purely physical beings also, physical human beings also, the physical type also. But their need is not actually the topic of our discussion here now. We know that the body, mind, and intellect are the three components of what you call personality. Some are the mental type, some are the physical type, some are the intellectual type. And for the purely physical type, there are rites and rituals. There are prescriptions for them also, which are mainly rites and rituals and such other physical work. But that is not our topic of discussion in this session. So we are dealing with only the intellectual and the emotional type of human beings. So the emotional approach utilizes the possibility of emotional excitability or the emotional susceptibility to the experience of truth as beauty. That is it. We are all susceptible to beauty. We are all emotionally excitable. So the emotional approach to truth utilizes that possibility, the possibility of our emotional excitability or the possibility of our emotional susceptibility to the experience of beauty, that is, to the experience of truth as beauty. Since we are all subjective, we are all susceptible to the experience of beauty. If truth can be offered in the form of beauty, majority of human beings, the emotional beings, will naturally get a perception of truth. They might not be aware that it is truth. What they are experiencing now is truth. They may not be aware they may not be aware of. Yet they will get a taste of truth in the form of beauty. And this approach, this emotional approach to truth is called art. And here we are dealing with the literary art. That is why I said we are not dealing with the physical type of human beings here, because we are going to discuss a text, and this text which we are going to discuss is essentially a product of what we call the literary art. So we must understand what happens in art, whether it is literary art or any other kind of art. What exactly happens in art? In art, the senses are activated. To be an emotional being, to me, also means to be a sensory being, to be at the sensory level. And so we cannot do anything, we cannot go to further realms of experience by negating the reality called senses. So, in the emotional approach, that is, in the approach of art, the senses are activated. Remember, the senses are activated, not stimulated. Stimulation of senses leads to something else, and activation of senses is entirely different. So in art, the senses are activated and the sensory experiences are organized, they are unified into the realm of emotional imagination and then directed towards an extrasensory or extra material apprehension of truth. This is what art does. It activates our senses, it generates sensory experiences. These sensory experiences generated are organized, they are unified into the realm of consciousness, sorry, into the realm of emotional imagination, and then they are directed towards the extrasensory, extra material apprehension of what you call truth. This process is very, very similar to the bliss experience of truth which a yogi is in. A yogi's experience of truth, a yogi's bliss experience of truth, the bliss that art gives us, the pleasure that art gives us, and the experience of truth which art gives us in the form of beauty is very similar to the bliss experience of a yogi. A yogi also is experiencing, relishing, savoring, enjoying truth, the bliss of truth. The artist or a person who is enjoying art, the receiver, he also is in a similar position. He is experiencing, tasting truth, but not as the bliss of the yogi, but as the experience, the pleasurable experience of beauty. It is not the bliss experience of the yogi, but it is a pleasurable, aesthetic experience of truth. That is truth as beauty. This is what art does. And this experience of an artist or this experience of one who is enjoying an artwork is called rasa. Rasa. So what is the, if you ask what is the endeavor of art, or what is the end of art, what is the purpose of art, the goal of art, the aim of art, the answer is to arouse rasa. To arouse rasa both in the artist and in the person who is reading or enjoying a work of art. So this artistic experience is with the participation of the senses, yet at the same time it exceeds its ordinary sensory limits. In the same way as the ultimate yogic experience is with the participation of senses, yet exceeding its normal species-specific functionality, artistic experience also is like that. I said that the yogic experience is actually with the participation of senses because you are still in the body. You have not passed away. You have not died. You have not cast away this body. You are in the body. So the senses do participate in it. Yet you exceed its normal species-specific, Homo sapiens-specific functionality. We are able to transcend that limitation and enjoy the bliss of truth. In the artistic experience also, a similar thing happens. The senses are participating. The senses are in it. Yet we exceed the ordinary limits of our sensoriness and enter into a different realm, an altered consciousness, a different realm where truth is palpable to us in the form of beauty or as the experience of beauty. So art is very much parallel to the artistic activity is very much parallel to what you can call the spiritual activity of the yogi. So here, when we are about to discuss the Mahabharata or any other classical text like that, we will be talking about the literary art. We will have to understand what exactly the literary art is. And we can say that the literary art is the art of employing language to evoke this experience of which we talked just now. So we can say that art is the act of shaping truth into a form of beauty. The literary art, therefore, is the act of shaping truth. It is the act of shaping and forming truth. It is the act of shaping truth into a form of beauty by using words, by employing words. And here we'll have to bring our focus to language. What exactly does language do in a literary work? Language has immense potential. It has tremendous potential. Language is a system of words. But what are words? Words actually have two dimensions, of which we have totally ignored the second one. Words have two dimensions, namely sound and silence. Unfortunately, we have noticed only sounds. We have never noticed and we have never given equal significance to the amount of silence in it. A word is composed of sound and silence. A text is composed of words and an equal number of silences or a greater number of silences. The silences between words are not absences, they are presences. They are very much linguistic presences. They are presences in the form of silences. They are unheard words. And these unheard words communicate subtly. If the heard words communicate grossly, we can say that these unheard words communicate subtly. We must distinguish between the silences within the text and the silences of absence in our daily life. There are so many occasions in our life. There is a lot of time in our daily life where we sit simply, idly, in silence. That is an absence. That is a silence of absence. We must not confuse the silences in a text with the silences of absence in our daily life. So these words in a text which communicate or commune with sounds and silences are called images. So the literary art can be understood as the act of employing images, word images, to create or generate or shape truth into a palpable, beautiful form. Now, to understand the difference between silence in a text and silence outside a text in our real life, I'll just give you an example. the example of a stationary bicycle. Just imagine a stationary bicycle. The bicycle, you can take it like this. Suppose the bicycle is actually still and stationary. Can it stand like that? If it is not put on stands, no. It will fall down. It will be affected by the gravity of the earth and it will fall down. But just imagine that we are riding a cycle at a terrific speed. Suddenly we apply brakes and stop there. The cycle will be able to remain in that stationary position for a long time. Why? Because the cycle is stationary, but it is not still. It is still in motion. The motion is happening inside the bicycle in a very subtle manner. That is why it is able to defy the power of the earth's gravity and remain without falling down. That momentum, when the momentum is over, when the motion in it is over, then it becomes a victim of the earth's gravity and then falls down. So just because you see a stationary bicycle, you cannot conclude that cycle is still. It could be in motion also. Similarly, let us take another example from another art form, the Karanas in dance. We talk about the 108 Karanas in dance, and usually even dancers explain Karanas as still postures. It is not actually true. They are postures captured in motion. It is motion captured in an instant. The 108 Karanas that we talk about, of which Bharadamani talks in his Natya Shastra, they are not still images. They are not still postures. They are postures which represent motion captured in an instant of time, just like the stationary bicycle that we saw now. Karana is actually motion itself, motion captured. It is just like a photographic capturing of motion. So the language used in the literary art, that is the literary language, functions in such a manner. The literary language therefore has several features: images, figures of speech, exaggeration, surrealism, juxtaposition of various things, multiple space-time frames, so many such things. And all these are actually the strength and potential and tools which language has to offer as a medium of the literary art. So all these can be and are freely employed in literary creation. And therefore, they are not meant to be approached and understood literally, that is realistically. We are talking about realism. So the words that we find in a text, the blank spaces that we find in a text, the punctuations which signify various kinds of silences in the text are not meant to be approached and understood literally, that is realistically. They are meant to be approached literarily. There is a world of difference between being literal and being literary. And to approach literarily means to grasp the literary value tagged on to every word and image. Because every word is a word. The words in a literary text are worlded words. And to grasp the word, it requires a special kind of intellect. It is not enough to have the head alone. We need to have the heart also for it, to capture the essence of these worlded words. For example, we can understand it better in the field of mathematics, perhaps. There are digits. We know that the entire world of mathematics functions with 10 digits, 0 to 9. And a digit has not just one meaning, or a digit has not just meaning, it has value also. And the value of a digit is contextual. The same digit means differently in different numbers, for example. They say the number 8 is the digit 8, simply the digit 8, if it is written in isolation. But when I write 19,820, the meaning of 8 as a digit is not applicable here because it has a value tagged onto it. And that value you call the numerical value. So in this number, 8 ceases to be a digit and it becomes only a part of a greater numerical context. And that numerical contextual value of 8 is what is here, what is to be understood in this number called 19,820. We cannot say that I know what 8 is, and so this is the meaning of 8 here. 8 simply means 8. We cannot say like that. So the numerical value of every digit is what is important when that digit is part of a larger number. That is, it is the numerical value that makes us sense the meaning of the numbers, which cease to be mere digits. Similarly, we can say that the swara, the musical note. There are 7 basic musical notes in all world music. Millions and millions of tunes and songs can be created from these basic 7 swaras. But every individual swara is neutral. It has no meaning in itself. Only in the context of different ragas, a swara becomes endowed with a different musical meaning. And it is these musical meanings that enable us to catch the raga. The same musical notes, the same swaras might be there in this raga and that raga. But when they are delineated as part of a context, a musical context or a raga context, then the same swara becomes different in the other raga. That is why we talk about the same swara in, for example, a raga called Begada as Begada Madhyama. Even though the same Madhyama becomes, even though the same Madhyama occurs in so many other ragas, the very same sound frequency occurs in so many other ragas. But we discuss this Madhyama as Begada Madhyamam itself, because the way Madhyama is handled in the Begada raga is entirely different from how it means in another raga, even though the sound frequency is exactly the same. So each and every swara takes on a meaning. It becomes a live individual. It assumes an individual identity only in the context of ragas. And it is these musical meanings that enable us to catch the raga. Otherwise, it would be just a string of neutral, unconnected swaras. So the words in a text, in a literary text, are not and should not be allowed to be just a string of neutral, unconnected words. The cementing between them, the silences that operate as the cementing material between them, are equally or even more important. So what you call the overall experience or the overall meaning of the text, the textual meaning, that is what I discuss in textuality, the word textuality. The textual truth is the gestalt of the text. It is the compounded meaning of these words. It is not the mixed meanings of these words. A mixture can easily be separated into its components, whereas a compound cannot be. A compound is a totally different thing. So the compounded meaning of the words and silences in a text, in a literary text, is its gestalt. And this gestalt is actually the textual truth. Therefore, the partial lexical meanings, the dictionary meanings of these words employed in it, are not relevant at all. Just as we talked about the different digits which occur in different numbers, the different words that occur in a literary text are not just the sum of their lexical meanings. The meaning of a literary text is not just the sum of its lexical meanings, because every word is loaded. Every word and every silence in a text is loaded, and the load on it is the literary meaning. This is how we come to the Mahabharata. Now we try to understand the Mahabharata. What is the Mahabharata? It is an itihasa. What is an itihasa? Itihasa is puravritam kathayuktam. That is history narrated as story. History narrated as literature. History shaped and formed into a literary text. See, there is clay. Just take an example. Clay. Clay is there. Clay is reality. But clay has no shape. It is just there. Now, what does the artist do? The artist takes the clay, shapes it into a form, and he converts it, he transforms it into a beautiful statue. What is the texture of the statue? Clay. But what is the statue? Is it clay? No. The statue is shaped clay. We can say that it is shaped clay. It is formed clay. It is the product of the art of shaping the clay into a form of beauty. Similarly, there is history. History is reality, but history has no specific shape. It is just there. The Itihasakara, the literary artist, takes up history, kneads it, and shapes it into a specific form, a form of beauty, a literary form. This is what you call the Itihasa. So you can say that the Itihasa is artistically shaped reality, artistically shaped reality, or artistically shaped history. That is reality ideated as literature. Reality ideated as literature, or history ideated as literature, which means the entire texture of it is reality, but it is not realism. I hope the distinction between reality and realism is now clear. The entire texture, each and every atom of an Itihasa is imbued with reality and with history, but it is not realism. It is reality, but not realism. Because realism, we saw earlier, realism is the claim of objectively faithful representation of the material world, with imagination or without imagination. Realism is the claim of faithfully or objectively representing the material world with imagination or without imagination. With imagination, it is called fiction or literature. Without imagination, it is called history. Because history claims that it documents, whereas literature composes. History is called documentation. History claims documentation, whereas literature is composition. But the problem is imagination. When we use the word imagination, there are at least two kinds of imagination: conscious imagination and unconscious imagination. Fiction is a product of conscious imagination. That the presence of imagination in fiction or literature is acknowledged, whereas history is a product of unconscious and unacknowledged imagination. History, a historical text, is a product of imagination, prejudices, ignorance, conditionings, and so many other conscious agenda also. There are certain conscious agenda also. For example, the colonial agenda. When the European historians wrote histories about histories of non-European worlds, there was very, very decidedly the colonial agenda also. So in this light, we must have a brief understanding of history also, especially since we are dealing with an Itihasa. History, how to approach history or how to understand history. Now I'm dealing with all these topics because at the outset itself, I told you that we are people who are forced to approach classical texts from the formats of contemporary frames of epistemology. I told you that in the beginning itself. That is why we are discussing these terms also, these ideas also, because only then we will be able to understand how to approach a classical text with the support of these contemporary formats, yet go away or drift away from the conventional essentialization practices which Europeans have attempted. So history, what exactly is history? A historical moment comprises three components, I would say, three components: time, space, and causality. These three are objective realities. They are objective realities in as much as the events that occurred in a particular historical moment have actually been experienced by a set of human beings. So you can say that they are objective realities: time, space, and causality. That is what constitutes history. The events were experienced. Why? Because they were objective in nature, but their causality was not understood in its fullness, even by the people who actually experienced the historical events. Why? Because causality is multiple. Historical time, maybe you can argue that it flows in a linear way, but causality is multiple. And even the people who actually experienced a historical moment, that is, people who experience the space and time of the historical moment, have not understood its causality, because causality is not completely visible or manifest. It is multi-dimensioned as well. So the actual now, when you come to historical documentations or historical representations of historical time, the actual experience is over, long over. So in a historical text, what the historian is doing is to recollect. And when you recollect, you can only remember the events. You cannot recollect the causality at all. You can only remember the events. And even the events you can only partly remember, not wholly. All remembrances are partial, hazy, and also colored by the temporal remove from the actual historical moment. Besides, the causality underlying them is totally inaccessible. Besides all this, the historian is creating a narrative on events which he has not experienced at all. The historian has not experienced these events at all. He is claiming an objective documentation of events of a remote time and a remote place. This can amply explain how removed the historical narrative will be from actual reality. So, to assume that history is reality is unrealistic. To take history as reality is unrealistic. So, we are trying to locate and understand the presence of the real in history or literature. Here, we are actually trying to locate and understand the presence of what you call real in history or literature. History employs objective language. Objective language operates on linear causality, that is, linear sequencing and temporal chronology. But causality is not linear. Reality is not linear. Causality is multiple. It is relative as well. It is multidimensional also. And the interconnectedness of these multiple dimensions can never be captured in the historical textual discourse, because the language of history is linear. Therefore, history is a contradiction in terms. That is, reality is impossible to represent in history. Only subjective perspectives of reality are possible even in history. Which means you can never state history. You can only tell it. And when you tell history, it becomes a story. It becomes a tale. Even a historian only tells tales, tells history. So the historian is an ordinary storyteller who does not even know that it is his story. And therefore, he wants the readers to take it as reality. Whereas Itihasa is the act of telling a contemporary history. It is not remembered, it is not recollected. The Itihasakara is not recollecting past events. The narrator is part of the story, part of the historical moment. He is even a participant in it. The narrator is an omniscient narrator. And as an omniscient narrator, the narrator knows the multiple causality underlying the events that are unfolding when he is still present in it. He is one who knows the reality that language cannot capture that causality. He is one who knows the fact, he is one who knows the three tenses of time. Therefore, when the Itihasakara tells history, he employs all the powers of the medium that he is using to tell it. That is language. That is literature. So he transforms the historical moment into a magnificent, beautiful edifice, a literary edifice, a multi-layered narrative told in a surreal way. It is surrealistic in narration, not realistic. And reality artistically presented is surreality. we can say that reality artistically presented is surreality. The Mahabharata is such a surreal presentation of historical reality. That is how we can approach it. Also, therefore, we can say that the Mahabharata is a literary objectification of our inner world. Why outside? The human history that we Shwaya?
Namaskar, sir. There was a small network issue. You were not audible for a minute.
Okay. Can you tell me where you left me? At which point you left me?
Madhu, it is a story. It is a telling of inner world also.
Okay. So I'll try to continue from that. So we can say that the Mahabharata is our inner story, because whatever we see outside, the history that we see outside is actually a projection of, or a culmination of, or an objectification of what is happening inside of the inner activity. So the Mahabharata is our inner story, and the historical personages used by Vyasa are merely used as basis or platforms on which to illustrate or expound or explain or explore or even expose our inner vasanas. That is, our inner personality penchants and predilections. That is why the real names of these historical personalities themselves have been avoided. Instead, bhavanamas have been given. Duryodhana, Dushasana, etc. are all bhavanamas. We do not know what their real names were because they are irrelevant. Weren't they actually historical people? Yes, they walked the earth. But when Vyasa uses them, they are used as platforms on which to expound our inner predilections. Therefore, the Duryodhana of the Itihasa becomes the personification of the Duryodhana within. The Arjuna of Mahabharata becomes the personification of the Arjuna within us. And the Krishna of Mahabharata is the Krishna in us. And to do this, for this exercise, only a surreal language will work. A realistic language, a linear language will not work. Only a multi-dimensional and multi-causal surreal textscape will be able to enunciate the inner life world philosophically and aesthetically. And the objective, therefore, of the Mahabharata is to present this inner life world with all its complexities and resolutions, rather than just the outer historical space-time world with its facts and factoids. What is important in the Mahabharata, in the text of the Mahabharata, is not the facts and factoids, but the life world, the inner life world. Because facts and factoids have no use for a seeker of truth. Truth is preferable to facts. Factual truth versus fictional truth, therefore, is an equation or an opposition or a problematic of the text of any Itihasa. There is the conflict between factual truth and fictional truth, or factual truth and literary truth. For example, there are certain, I know that it is time to wind up. I'll wind up as early as fast as possible now. For example, there are certain questions that we recurrently ask. The image of the chariot with the 5 horses drawn by Krishna, in which Arjuna is seated. Is this actually true? Is this actually true that 5 horses were there? Is it actually true that Krishna drove the chariot and made it stand exactly at the center of the battlefield? if you ask physical questions like this, maybe you can find answers, maybe you may not find answers. Because here you are searching for facts and factoids. Facts are not important in the literary text called Itihasa. Only truth is important. Because the image of this chariot with 5 horses driven by Krishna and seating Arjuna and positioned in between the Pandava and the Kaurava armies, when it is represented by Vyasa, Vyasa has a specific purpose because this functions as an image expounding certain deep philosophical truths. Another example, Ganga, the name Ganga. Ganga is the name of a river and it is named after the goddess Ganga. How to approach the idea called Ganga, the river? Is it that the river is a manifestation of Ganga Devi? Is the river not actually a river? Is it just not? Is it more than just volumes and volumes of water flowing in it? Is it beyond that? We do not know. You may be able to find answers, you may not be able to find answers. I remember an instance in connection with this example. There was a saint, a sage from Kerala. In Malayalam, he used to be called Parakkum Swami, Vishnudevananda, Swami Vishnudevananda. When he met his guru, the guru had told him that the Ganga is a divine geographical feature. It is just not an ordinary volume of water flowing. And on the first day that he met his guru, it was the day of the Ganga Arati, and at dusk time, this guru and his followers were heading towards the Ganga to perform an Arati. At that time, this man, who had not yet become the disciple, but he had actually come there to test the guru, he also was there in the group. And when they were waving the Arati lamps for the Ganga, an inward thought passed in his mind. After all, isn't it just water? What is this nonsense of waving Arati for a geographical feature? The moment that thought passed through him, suddenly he started saying Ganga as not water, but an effulgence of light. Light is flowing on, not in the form of water, but it was just a river of light. This is an experience which he got. So is it that Ganga is a miraculous geographical feature? We do not know. Now, when we call Bhishma as Gangeya, that is the son of Ganga, what does it mean? Was he collected from the river Ganga when he was a small child? Or is it because he is the son of Ganga Devi? Or is it because he is the son of a woman who is the embodiment of all the qualities associated with the goddess called Ganga? Or is it that the river Ganga in some manner has all the qualities of the Ganga Devi and that is why the river is called Ganga? How to approach Bhishma? How to approach the idea called Gangeya? We do not know. Another example, what do you mean by Chiranjeevi? Is it the long-lived or the deathless? We don't know. How is it that Hanuman figures in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata? What is the space of time between the Ramayana and the Mahabharata? How is it possible for Hanuman, who was a character in a very, very earlier Itihasa, figures in this later Itihasa also? He is the Narada of the Mahabharata, the same Narada everywhere. He can be seen in the Ramayana, he can be seen in the Puranas. And we have books written by Narada on religion, spirituality, music, etc. Is Narada one Narada? Did Arjuna actually undergo a corporeal metamorphosis during the Pandavas' incognito phase of forest life, Ajnatavasa? We do not know. Is the kingdom of Ulupi, for example, actually a kingdom? Of course, there cannot be such a kingdom underneath the Ganga river. So then where is Ulupi from? Her existence is true because we find that Arjuna has wedded her and have even had a son by her. If so, where is she from? Did Arjuna actually physically travel to the Devaloka? Is it possible? Or is it his mental journey or an astral journey to the subtle worlds? If it is so, what happened to the space and time around him during his earthly absence, if he was absent there? How did the other Pandavas interact with that space and time and with Arjuna, who is both here in the world and in his astral journey? Was it Krishna's divine miracle or a most opportune eclipse that enabled Arjuna behead Jayadratha? Is Nagaloka, for example, an actual ancient kingdom or an astral world? Is it possible for beings from these astral worlds to inhabit the earth and live lives of ordinary human beings? Is Kurukshetra real or textual? Of course, sometimes we will be able to supply concrete answers to these questions also. For example, when we discuss the Kurukshetra, when you read through the Mahabharata, we know that the Mahabharata gives a very accurate description of the battlefield of Kurukshetra. It says in the Mahabharata that the battlefield, the central battlefield area of Kurukshetra was 64 square kilometers. And the topographical features also have been described very vividly. That is a different matter. The point that I was trying to make was, we don't know. When we ask such questions pertaining to the facts or the factoids of physical life, we don't know. Remember, we won't know. And also remember, we needn't know such facts, because these facts are irrelevant to our understanding of the world and our life. After all, the Itihasa has been crafted in order to enable human beings to understand the meaning of the world and life in it. Besides, these facts are merely dramatizations of certain principles, which I said earlier, truths that occasioned them historically. There have been historical facts, no doubt, but these historical facts were occasioned by certain principles that are beyond time and space, the principles which are beyond history, the principles which are sourced and cited in extra historical realms. Sourced and cited, S-I-T-E-D, cited. These principles are eternal. They are sourced and cited in extra historical realms. And the purpose of an Itihasa is to enable the human mind to understand, to comprehend, and to obtain a peep into that extra terrestrial or extra material dimension. This is how we can approach the Mahabharata. So when we say that the Mahabharata is an Itihasa, and when we say that it is not possible for us to approach and study the Mahabharata the canonical way, or the Vedas and the Upanishads in the canonical way, here we have an Itihasa which tries to explain the same Vedic principles, the Vedic truths, the spiritual truths, the eternal truths, which are not palpable for the intellect of ordinary human beings, but which are aesthetically approachable, accessible for a sensitive heart. And a sensitive heart is called Sahridaya. A heart sensitive to art is called Sahridayatva. Who is there who does not respond to art? So it is for them that the Itihasa called the Mahabharata has been crafted by Vedavyasa. I think that is how we can approach the idea of reality, realism, and the process of ideation in the Mahabharata. I understand that it is already time to wind up my session. So let me conclude now.
Namaste, Madhu sir. It was very happy listening to you, and it was one of the most intellectual, clarity-giving talk you have given all of us. My question is, you were telling about the Platonic view, where we have a dichotomy between the phenomenal world and the ideal world, and the phenomenal world is considered as the unrealistic expression, which later, after the post-enlightenment period, it changed into the realism or the reality. So both the Greek, my philosophy understanding is very meager, but both the Greek and the post-enlightenment period can be considered as the Western view, no? So as a whole, what caused this tectonic shift in the, probably I guess it's a religion, but what exactly is the root cause of this tectonic shift in the perspective from unreality to reality?
The root cause was actually religion itself, because philosophy had given way to religion, the Christian religion. Whereas in philosophy, we could ask questions and get answers. In religion, you could not ask questions. There were only stipulated set and fixed answers which we had to believe. Whereas when the scientific revolution happened during the Enlightenment period, it was discovered that what religion had to say was often in contradiction with new discoveries and new findings. So the insistence on proof became very prominent. And proof was envisioned, or evidence was envisioned, in terms of the senses. Only something which is sensory was regarded as an evidence, a valid source of evidence. So it is there that this dichotomy came. Any other kind of evidence was not acceptable. Something which had to be experienced with the senses, something which could be experienced through the senses, only that was regarded as an evidence, valid evidence, empirical evidence. That is why that shift came.
Before concluding, let me also take the privilege to thank our speaker, Professor Madhu sir, and all who have joined today. Sir, sincere thanks to you for the sea of wisdom and knowledge you have showered us with during your amazing session. Right from making us acknowledge the necessity to understand the academic perspective and every term of the title, realism, ideation, textuality, and how to approach the text emotionally and intellectually to palate truth and to understand the objective of Mahabharata. This lecture certainly benefited all of us from your breadth of knowledge and depth of expertise. Giving it your time from your busy schedule really helped to make this program a success. Thank you so much, sir. And Achuji, I should really definitely mention that your introduction to Madhu sir really served its purpose in appreciating and valuing his knowledge he imparted to us today. I also thank all those who have joined us to experience the savor and sweet of today's session with Madhu sir. I also thank the team for bringing this knowledge enriching session to us. My thank you note would be incomplete if I do not show gratitude to our beloved Amma for showering her immense grace for the success of this program. Thank you, Amma, and thank you all. I pray that each of us are able to present the ideas or the knowledge we gained from this session like a bow on the wrapped gift of knowledge to our students or any of our listeners. I humbly offer my words at the lotus feet of Amma. Let us conclude the session by chanting the Shanti Mantra. Before that, if anyone needs to add any words.
A few words more, please. My pranams to Amma, my gratitude and pranams to Achyutamrita ji, my pranams to all of you, the entire team, and all the people who lend patient audience to my humble words. My thanks to all of you.
Thank you so much, sir, once again. So let us conclude by chanting Shanti Mantra. Om Lokah Samastah Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokah Samastah Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokah Samastah Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Once again, thank you all and Namaskar.
Namaskar.